Are you familiar with Colin Kaepernick, the NFL football player, and his kneeling protests?
Yes, yes, of course.
I know you didn't talk too much about sports in your piece, but here in the United States, for a game like football, which has become America's pastime, probably over the last, I would say, 40 years, it's really overtaken baseball, which for the longest time really was America's sport, right? That's why the national anthem in baseball games was such an important thing. But I would say maybe 15, 20 years ago, the military and the NFL formed this kind of disgusting partnership where the national anthem now takes precedent in football games, which is a relatively new thing. Um, and Kaepernick, initially, for those that don't know the whole story, don't remember it because it feels like it's been a million years ago. It's only been like 8. He initially just didn't stand for the national anthem, right? He just sat down, and he was injured too at the time. He wasn't even playing. But in a slow media cycle, this got all the attention, and someone questioned why. Excuse me. He had been sitting during the national anthem, and he says, "Oh, I'm protesting police violence." He kind of went more into it. He wasn't as flippant as what I just said. Um, and there was a huge backlash for not standing for the national anthem, as if this was something that was extremely un-American. And then Colin Kaepernick meets with a Green Beret, which I found kind of counterintuitive to the protest. And they had this meeting where Kaepernick goes, "Well, what can I do that wouldn't be offensive to you and soldiers?" And the Green Beret goes, "Kneel. If you kneel for the fallen soldiers, honoring them, um, then we'll let you have your protest." Pretty much, right? So Kaepernick kneels, kneeling becomes a thing. And then the kneeling even gets looked at as being un American, which I find extremely odd since that was the kneeling was the American compromise. But that is how kind of entrenched we are as a nation in these ideals of the greatness, if you will, where even when you meet with someone in the military, the nation is still like, no, no, no. And he's been, for the most part, blackballed from football as a player. He did recently turn down a job as a coach. But yeah, I wasn't sure if you were aware of like the Kaepernick saga. What is your opinion on all of that?
Yeah, obviously, actually, Kaepernick was probably how I was the only thing I know
Really?
about American football. Or it's not big into
Okay.
American football particularly. Like, obviously, I know what it is, but I've never followed it much at all. Um, so yeah, I mean, I think more centrally surrounding like patriotism, and I'm sure what we'll get into later on with like the military, industrial, and military entertainment complex. I think what I've always sort of found interesting is, as you mentioned, this notion that patriotism with like jingoism, you almost get into circumstances, and I think a lot of the films that we'll talk about will
Mhm.
suggest this as well, is where you almost feel like you've made America and the American flag into such an ideal that any criticism whatsoever is considered disrespectful to the
Mhm.
point where people kind of feel like worshiping, in a sense, the flag is more important than what the flag ought to represent. Because I mean, for
Mhm.
a lot of the people that are hostile towards Kaepernick and otherwise as well, it's very much about, well, you're disrespecting the US. The US has all these freedoms, etc. The US military is a force for good. What he's protesting is a just cause. And it's
Mhm.
not really about what he's protesting or how he's going about it. It's this notion that America and the flag is sort of beyond any protest. It's beyond kind of like it's this notion that with American exceptionalism, particularly, it's like this is freedom, and it doesn't
Mhm.
matter who or what you're protesting, even if that runs counter to what we ought to represent, it's unacceptable. And I think particularly with sports, and as you mentioned with the NFL and the national anthem becoming so kind of like nationalistic,
Yeah.
particularly, I think that just manifests itself more than it would otherwise. But I think the sentiment generally persists.
I mean, what's funny about the NFL, and I'm not going to dwell on this too much longer, is that for the longest time when the national anthem was sang, players were in the locker room. They didn't come out till it was over. We didn't really have flyovers in football games. This again, this is a new thing. I mean, you talk about it in your piece when it comes to recruitment. There's a problem because we don't have a draft anymore, and not too many people are in a rush to go, shoot poor people in countries overseas. But that being said, we are great with our poverty draft. We're winning there.